Hey everyone, welcome to the Thinking Out Loud podcast. For the second episode here, we have Paul Vallas to be our guest. And Paul Vallas is a seasoned education reformer who was previously the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, and he's really have a life full of public service. He spent a lot of time in the Chicago Public Schools and the Philadelphia Public Schools and the New Orleans Public Schools after Hurricane Katrina hit in the early 2000s. And more recently, in 2023, he ran a mayoral campaign against Brandon Johnson, and he came second place in a very, very tight election. And Paul, feel free to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you. No, you've kind of summed it up. The good, the bad, and the ugly. If anybody wants to really know my record, they get the good, the bad, the ugly on Wikipedia or anything online. When you go through a really rigorous campaign where there's a lot of negativity flowing, you'll be amazed at the things that you don't realize that you've done over the years. So anyway, so people can certainly Google me. As you know, I do a lot of writing for the Chicago Tribune, as well as the Illinois Policy Institute. I'm a senior advisor to them, but I also do a regular column in the Chicago Contrarian. Okay. And how would I describe the Contrarian? And very much like a libertarian publication. So at the end of the day, I publish every Monday on a variety of issue-related topics. So it's basically, so I'm kind of a man of letters. So if people are looking, if people want to explore some of the things I've written about over the past few years, they can certainly go to those publications.
Yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of stuff. Should it be hard to find stuff on you online, especially when you're on a campaign? Like, it's going to be the good, the bad, and the ugly, as you said.
My wife calls it the post-campaign traumatic stress. That's how I deal with it. I write.
Makes sense, yeah. So my first question for you, as someone who's dealt with education basically for your entire life, President Trump ran on a campaign of dismantling the Department of Education, and ever since January 20th, he has been taking some actions into doing so. He signed the executive order to start that process a few months ago. I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on that, and how will that change the role of school districts? Will that bringing more autonomy to each school district and to the states and to the counties? How would that change? And as someone who really supports school choice, like how do you think that fits into the idea?
So, let me tell you my take on the U.S. Department of Education. First of all, the U.S. very quickly, because I've done a couple op-ed pieces on that subject, both for the New York Post and the Chicago Tribune. The U.S. Department of Education was created by Jimmy Carter as payback for the National Education Association. They wanted to create this statewide university Department of Education to basically advocate for their teacher-oriented agenda. It was vigorously opposed by Joe Califano, who was the longtime legendary liberal Democrat, head of health, education, and welfare under Carter, as well as Albert Shanker, the head of the American Federation of Labor, who basically said it would be government encroachment on local control and it could cause damage. My experience with the Department of Education is that it's been in existence for 50 years. There's been no academic improvement. Actually, we're regressing, and the achievement gap has not in any way nailed.
Yeah, we're going to go into that in a second. It's an interesting topic, but yeah.
Now, they will tell you that, but there's been a significant increase in the number of students going to college, and a doubling in the number of minority students, black students going to college, and those try to claim credit for that. Let me point out that increase has been largely due to two reasons. One is the slow, gradual abandonment of standards, and the second reason is loans. So what you have is there may have been a doubling going to college, but has there been a doubling graduating from college? And as you know, the whole debt crisis, the whole student debt crisis, is in large part because of the abandonment of standards combined with the making loans readily available. So at the end of the day, I would not chalk that up as a success when trying to justify the U.S. Department of Education. Let me also point out that I think the U.S. Department of Education has mismanaged, or they played a major role in the mismanagement of the federal student loan program.
Okay. So what you're arguing for, and we're going to get to the question again, but is that the Department of Education was indeed a quid pro quo thing. It was created to to satisfy the unions and to satisfy whoever Jimmy Carter wanted to be satisfied, and just created more problems with student loans and so on. How does that manifest for you when you were the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools?
Well, let me point out that I always felt that the U.S. Department of Education interfered with what I did as a superintendent under 3 separate administrations.
Yeah.
So, for example, during the Bush administration, under No Child Left, I got to get my reforms. No Child Left Behind. He wanted to. He pressured school districts, and they mandated that school districts target 20% of their Title I money to these private, consulting company, education tutoring companies like Edison, for example, and the infamous Edison company, to do tutoring and they punished districts who refused to do that. I thought it was a monumental waste of money. The Obama administration comes in. In the Obama administration, are very heavy-handed, tries to develop a national curriculum, tries to develop national testing. Now, of course, they'll say they weren't dating school districts to accept what they were offering, but they tied additional funding under No Child Left Behind, under Race to the Top. They tied it to them using the Common Core curriculum and to doing to selecting their testing model, etc. So they tried to micromanage what schools were doing, almost pre-selecting the curriculum, the test providers, and things like that. They used the obviously the additional money for Race to the Top to incentivize states for doing that. Many states came in and actually changed their laws around to respond to or to make themselves eligible for Race to the Top. And of course, you had the Biden administration, whose Department of Education was literally controlled by the National Education Association. And they blatantly discriminated against charter schools as well as parochial schools. For example, during the second COVID allocation, during the first COVID allocation, Jeannie Ives, who had been, not Jeannie Ives, the U.S. Education Secretary, I had given Betsy DeVos, sorry, Betsy, the other conservative. Betsy DeVos had allocated money based on a straight per pupil formula. In other words, private schools had 10% of kids. Private schools should get 10% of the COVID relief during the Trump COVID bailout. The Biden administration, under pressure from NEA, completely changed it around, and literally the private schools got maybe 2.5%, despite the fact that they were educating 10-11% of the kids. And then there were all sorts of criteria added to that. For example, the private schools that would get the money had to have like X number of kids who they were serving living below the poverty level. So in other words, they brutally and blatantly discriminated against private schools. That was just an example. And of course, we have the other examples of the way they tried to interfere on curriculum, and obviously with a lot of the DEI stuff that obviously has provoked a response by the Trump administration. But the point that I'm going to make is, whatever your philosophy, presidents have used the Department of Education to advance their agenda, and I believe as a superintendent, based on my experiences, that agenda has not always been in the best interests of students. They've attempted to impose their will. So I'm of the belief that you allocate the money to the schools, you make sure that the schools are spending the money right in terms of accounting and things like that, and that if you give the schools the money and the freedom and the autonomy to make decisions on how that money should be spent, and you don't discriminate it against either charter schools or private schools when it comes to providing financial support.
Mm-hmm. And what was the so a lot of what's happening to the Chicago Public Schools recently, we had a budget. We've been running a budget problem for years now, and back in your day when you were running the Chicago Public Schools, you did like you Dojified the Chicago Public Schools, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah.
And you went from a massively deficit projection to actually a balanced budget.
Right.
Right, and How do you think that could be done today? Because Chicago's running to a pitfall in terms of debt.
I'm glad you asked that question. I've actually written ad nauseum on that subject. Look, I believe actually that both the school district and the city's budget are intertwined, they're interrelated, and there's a pathway to solving, addressing both financial crises, because the city has an estimated $1 billion structural deficit. The schools have one that's $730 million, although they claim they've made some cuts and stuff like that. Now it's in the high 500s. But the bottom line is clearly, and the reason that those crises are interrelated is besides the schools getting 56% of all the property, besides the schools getting 56% of all the property taxes collected, 56%.
Okay.
They're also getting another $1 billion in subsidies from the city. So they're getting, on top of the 56% share of all property taxes, they get $1 billion in subsidies. Now let me point out that the amount of money going to the schools per pupil has actually risen by 40,000. What was the number again? It's risen by 40% since 2019.
Since 2019.
Because while the money
even though
enrollment dropped,
and
schools were closed for 78 consecutive weeks during COVID.
So what drove that increase in spending? Did you mean spending per student?
Spending per student. Despite a 9% increase in enrollment, it actually was the enrollment loss was actually greater. But last year there was a flood of migrants, so that for the first time in like 10 years, the enrollment actually grew. The teachers union has been one of the strongest supporters of the sanctuary city policy. The only way they're going to stem the enrollment decline, because they've lost so many students, is through migrants. So, to a certain extent, the sanctuary city policy is really a political policy to get enrollment up, to get the state's population up, so they're not losing congressional seats, etc. Look, the bottom line is what drove that increase in per pupil funding is property taxes are fixed. Whether you have 330,000 students or one student, you get the same amount of property taxes.
Okay.
So, and the school district raises their property taxes to the maximum allowable cap every single year. Okay, so at the end of the day, the property taxes always go up. Now, the state's funding formula is weighted in favor of high poverty districts, and it really protects high poverty districts from significant losses in state funding because of enrollment declines. There is some adjustment, but not the type of adjustment you usually have, because it's a kind of a needs-based formula, and that needs-based formula gives a lot of weight to schools that are half empty. So those two reasons are a big part of it. And then the city subsidies have remained unchanged. The city was still up until last year paying for the employer's share of their non-teacher pensions, and they were providing other money. They were still carrying a good portion of the school district's capital debt. So their revenue base has continually expanded because it bears no relationship to the number of students. So in actuality, the percent being spent per pupil has gone from like 21,000 to 30,000 just since 2019 alone.
Yeah. So I want to touch on something you said in the Department of Education question, and it kind of contradicts what we're seeing in Chicago with the increase in spending, and yet quality standards for education haven't really changed dramatically. Back when you were in Philadelphia in the mid-2000s, you were responsible for a major shift towards charter schools and less emphasis on district schools. And among what happened in those schools was results in English proficiency and math proficiency rose from 10 to 23%, I believe. That's what I looked at. What was different then that we can't do in Chicago, and how come we're not doing it in Chicago?
Let me respond. Not necessarily. There actually wasn't a dramatic shift in charters. I only approved 14 new charters, and a number of them were charters that were approved to address problems like overcrowding, and I opened up a number of alternative schools for students who had dropped out. We actually rejected 37 charter proposals, which were not quality proposals, so we were really rigorous. It's not until I go to New Orleans, and obviously Katrina had destroyed the school system, that we build a school system that was majority charter and ultimately almost charter, because there were no schools there. So when we decided to reopen the schools in New Orleans, a district that had been the second poorest performing in the state and one of the most
One of the worst in the country.
one of the worst in the country, hands down one of the worst in the country.
Yeah.
We wanted to build a system of independent, autonomous schools. And so many schools, traditional public schools, got their own charter so they could reopen independently with all the money flowing to the schools rather than money getting skimmed off the top. But what we did in New Orleans was we actually had a relationship with the union that allowed us to do a number of things. They were supportive of us raising the standards. They were supportive of us extending what we refer to as the non-union day and the non-union year. In other words, we literally kept schools open 2 additional hours every day, and in the summer for 6 weeks for the majority of the kids to allow them to get the additional instructional support that they needed, because nothing closes the achievement gap faster than instructional time on task. And we also had the ability to go in and not only set high standards, but to hold schools accountable. So this was the case in New Orleans, and to a lesser extent, and well, to a similar extent in Chicago, where the union gave us a lot of flexibility to make changes in schools that benefited the kids, even if those changes impacted their members. You see what I mean?
Okay.
Well, you're not seeing that now. The current union in Chicago resists any changes that impact their members, impact their work, the length of their work day, their job security, their job title, their responsibilities. They oppose anything. They micromanage. So schools principals and their elected local school councils have no power to alter the schools. That was different in Chicago, and that was different in Philadelphia. And in Philadelphia, we did open, we had, I'd say about maybe 25% of the district were charter schools, but both the charter schools and the traditional public schools, their test scores skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating when I say, according to state data, over a 9-year period, there was a tripling in math scores.
Wow.
And a doubling in reading scores across the board. No testing controversies.
And was that similar in New Orleans too? Because New Orleans still ranks poorly in education.
Well, New Orleans ranks in the middle of the pack, so they went within.
Even though Louisiana is not, even though Louisiana is generally considered one of the worst.
Well, not necessarily anymore. What's happened since Katrina is Louisiana has seen some of the most dramatic increases in test scores across the board, in part because of the reforms that were engendered through post-Katrina. And what happened in fact, a study that came out listed Louisiana and one other state as the only states to show improvement on the NAEP scores post-COVID. In other words, those are the only states that have shown progress. So, under Paul Pasternak and John White, the state has undergone a transformation because every year they raise standards. Every year they raise the bar. Now, what happened in New Orleans was New Orleans went from the second poorest performing state to school district in the state, where over the next 7 years, New Orleans led the state in academic improvement by 22 points. And it went from the second poorest performing school district in the state to somewhere middle of the pack. Obviously a lot of progress needs to be made, but and incidentally, the academic improvements were across all demographics. For example, special needs kids went from 11% proficiency to 42% proficiency during that period of time. So it had so no school district in the country, what I would say is moderate to large school district, has seen the type of dramatic increases in test scores that you saw in Philadelphia or that you saw in New York, and that's a fact. And it's because they embraced high standards. It's because they embraced accountability that you saw those type of increases. And if Philadelphia and Chicago demonstrated anything, was that you can find common ground with the unions. You can find common ground with the unions.
How do you do that exactly? Because the unions are usually a problem with opening new charter schools. How do you negotiate with unions in terms of allowing for?
Well, I think it would be very difficult now, in part because the unions really became radicalized, and I'll tell you when it really happened.
What do you mean by radicalized?
Well, prior to 2010, the unions nationally are losing ground. There's a big push in both parties, the Democratic Party and Republican Party, for more school choice. not necessarily parochial and private school choice, although when I was school superintendent here, when I was the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools here, and I was still Daley's golden child, so to speak. You know what I mean? I actually offered the late Cardinal Francis George a charter for any parochial school that they had to close for financial reasons, that they could bring the schools into a charter and we could get them funded, we could keep them open. And of course, he declined. He lectured me on religious immersion. But the bottom line is it was a period when there was close cooperation, and what we did was we respected the members, we treated the unions as partners, we worked to provide better compensation for their members, and we really coordinated with them when it came to our initiatives designed to increase standards and accountability. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing is teachers strongly supported higher standards and accountability. Yeah. Teachers supported consequences for students not performing, and they did not dismiss consequences for schools that were struggling. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I thought, some people thought we could have moved more aggressively, but at the end of the day, we were able to realize significant progress. Now, what happened is, it really accelerates when the Obama administration comes in. The unions nationally are losing ground. They're losing members. There's a big push for more charters. If you remember the Obama administration with Race to the Top, they were telling states that they wouldn't get charter school, they wouldn't get Race to the Top money unless they changed laws, not only making it easier, but in effect pressing states to close down failing schools and things like that. So the unions really saw it as a stepped up assault. So the unions led by Lewis.
Here in Chicago.
In Chicago, and of course Randy Weingarten in New York, and the name escapes me. The teachers union head in LA. Okay. They decided that they needed allies. So the unions really sought allies among the progressive left.
So the so-called radicalization of the unions came in the last 5 years.
I would say around 2010. That's when the core caucus got elected. That's when Randy Weingarten is riding high in New York. That's when LA really becomes radicalized. Yeah. Because I remember Randy Weingarten 15, 20 years ago. I mean, I almost became chancellor in New York public schools at the invitation of Giuliani, and I was invited to go out to LA. And I remember the unions were a little open-minded, and they were a little more open-minded. But really what happens around 2010, they become radicalized, and they needed allies, and they really aligned themselves they wrapped themselves in the flag of the progressive movement. And they became one of the prime funders of these far-left organizations. Like, if you look at who the Chicago Teachers Union has been funding and providing infrastructure for, Black Lives Matter, all these far-left organizations, the national teacher unions have become the bank. They become radicalized. They become highly politicized. And I don't know if it's the right word.
And how are they today with accountability? Because a lot of what I hear, your push is toward is more independence for schools in terms of, take out the Department of Education and leave the school boards to have more power, and open more charter schools and so on. How do you balance this accountability with opening more autonomously, put it that way?
Let me just close my comment by saying the embrace of the far left. My mother used to tell me, who you hang around with, you become more like. And I think what happened was the unions became more radicalized through their alliances. So you've seen the emergence of Stacey Davis Gates or a Jackson Potter. Incidentally, all failed teachers, by the way, like Brendan Johnson. Brendan Johnson taught 3 years in an elementary school I built, and a junior school, and 1 year at a high school I built, Westinghouse High School. 1 year before he found
came to the unions.
He found refuge because he couldn't cut it as a teacher. That's just a fact.
Yeah, we're
So,
going to get to Johnson in a few
yeah,
minutes.
right. So we're being run by failed teachers. But the point is, the unions have it's all now about membership. It's numbers, it's dues. They've really evolved, particularly the national unions, into a political organization.
Huge bureaucracy.
Huge bureaucracy. But they are political. In Chicago, they are the backbone of the current Democratic Party in Chicago.
Okay.
The teachers union, SEIU to a lesser extent, they're the bank. They provide the infrastructure. They're closely aligned with the Cook County Democratic Board president. They are among the biggest, if not the biggest, contributors to the Democratic Party. I mean, 80-90% of their dues actually goes into political activism. So they become this financial machine next to Pritzker. They become this financial machine underwriting the Democratic Party and advancing an agenda. And their goal is more members, higher pay, greater benefits, more dues, more political clout. They've abandoned standards. The state and the Chicago Public Schools.
Unions have abandoned standards in terms of accountability, in terms of test scores, in terms of math and English proficiency. How does that work? Because obviously, if you're opening more schools, you're going to need some standards in terms of understanding how funding actually affects people, and where do you need to improve student.
Well,
how does that come into effect?
Well, if it's a CTU school, they don't want you to keep score. I mean, look, the district passed a resolution where they will now not rank schools by academic performance.
What would they rank them by?
That's a good question.
Okay.
But look, when you spend now decades trying in schools and when the schools have shown no improvement, and when you've been, what do? You want to redefine what improvement means. So what happens is, where we got rid of social promotion in 1995, and it was very controversial at the time, and imposed high standards and accountability.
What do you mean by social promotion?
Where you would not promote kids just based on the fact that they're a year older.
Okay.
You would basically retain them if they're not performing.
Okay, great.
We would have anywhere from 120, 130,000 kids going to mandatory summer school as a condition for improvement, for promotion.
So just
if
lowering
they
the bar.
did not perform. Yeah. So we raised the bar, and children responded. And but they have since abandoned social promotion. That's how you get, or they've returned to social promotion, socially promoting kids. They're not holding teacher accountable for academic performance anymore. They're not holding schools accountable for academic performance. They're so to a certain extent, it's constituted a complete abandonment of accountability. They want to erase the scorecard. That's why they're going after magnet schools. It's ironic
What do you mean by magnet schools? Just for the audience too.
They want to get rid of select enrollment magnet schools. The school district has always had select enrollment schools, like they've had gifted schools. I think at one time there were 1,100 gifted elementary schools. They've had select enrollment magnet high schools. I expanded the number of select enrollment magnet high schools fivefold. I also put these type of magnet programs like international baccalaureate programs into neighborhood schools so that
to hone each person's individual talent into
like enrichment, like AP accelerated. Well, they want to get rid of all that stuff. They want to because they want to get rid of things that distinguish students by academic performance, and they want to get rid of schools that embarrass other schools. The reason that they
embarrass other schools?
Yeah, in terms of academic performance. The reason they attack Whitney Young, I mean, Jackson Potter constantly attacked Whitney Young. He went to Whitney Young. He was a student at Whitney Young. You know what I mean? I mean, the teacher union leaders and most of their members either send their kids to private schools, or they send their kids, or they got their kids in select enrollment magnet schools. The mayor talks about how his kids go to public schools. His kids don't go to public schools in his neighborhood. His kids go to magnet schools outside his neighborhood. All right, the very schools that he wants to get rid of. So because they offer an embarrassing contrast with the failing neighborhood schools. So they don't want that contrast. They don't want parents to distinguish.
And how does that relate to school choice? Because school choice is something that a lot of people, including yourself, have been pushing towards. I personally, I'm for giving parents more rights to choose what they do for their kids.
Well, the unions don't want parents to have choice.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But how does the fact that we have limited accountability, we have council people in the city school board that doesn't send their kids to their own schools, how does that affect school choice, and how does that help or not help?
It doesn't. What you have is you have a system that continues to be degraded. I mean, the system is performing abysmally. Black students' SAT scores in math are in the single digits, and reading they're just above the single digits. I mean, the Latinos
In ACT
population on SAT do not do much better. I mean, test score. I mean, you have graduation rates like black students have 79% graduation rates. Yet, I think 11% of the kids are at proficient in language arts and on the SAT, and 8% in math on the SAT. I mean, what is that?
That's in Chicago? Is there like
That's Chicago.
Is that a national trend?
No, I don't know what the national trend is. But that in Chicago, those are the results. I mean, the test scores are abysmal. You have what is it? They say, is it 55 schools that don't have a single student meeting state standards in language arts or in math. I mean, the union strategy, it's called they want to put their emphasis on community schools. We want to invest in community schools, so in these sustainable community schools. And really, it's kind of
what do they mean by community schools? Just for the audience.
The whole idea is that you prioritize providing that the funding is based on need, not based on the numbers.
Yeah, that was a change that was implemented for fiscal year 2025, right? Because we had a budget that was procured by students. So if you have a school with a lot of students, you have a lot of budget. And now we're changing to a system where if your school needs something, they're going to get more. How does that need quantified? Like,
let me point out that they'll argue that it sounds okay. What?
That sounds
on the surface, it sounds okay. Why shouldn't schools be funded based on their need rather than based on their numbers? But what people don't realize is school funding has always been weighted for poverty. That's what the federal Title I money does. So that's what the special education money does. So schools have always gotten additional money based on their needs. Mm-hmm. The Title I money follows the number of poverty kids, the free and reduced school lunch numbers and things like that. Special education money follows the special needs kids. So
that change doesn't really affect.
No. Really. So what I'm saying is the whole idea that somehow the current funding formula is unfair is bullshit. It's never been fair. It's never been unfair. Okay, and school districts get additional money based on student needs on top of the general state aid. But that's not what the union wants. What they want is they want schools to get resources even if they have few students. In other words, so for example, a school like Manly that has lost most of their enrollment, they're down to 75 kids last year. Yeah, 75 kids last year.
From they're down how much percent would you say?
Well, when I was there, they had about 700 kids.
So 90%.
Yeah, and the school's built for over 1,000.
Okay.
So they have 76 students. They have 27 faculty.
Mm-hmm.
Douglas School has 36 students and 22 faculty.
Okay.
So what happens is they don't get their staff positions cut because they've lost 70-80% of their students. You know what I mean? So
and
really,
how come are there so little students in that school? If they have so much faculty, if they have a lot of the property tax.
And do you want your kid to go to a failing school that is this massive cavernous building built for 1,000 students, and maybe there's 4 dozen kids? There's an economy of scale here. You can't have a whole lot of programs for kids when you have that few kids in the first place. It creates a really unhealthy environment. Classic example is on the west side. You have Manly High School. Manly High School has 76 kids, much celebrated. I renovated that school. I spent $10 million renovating that school. It's a WPA school. It's a beautiful school. When it had 700, 800 kids, and so they have 76 students. Yet 8 blocks away is Hope Academy. Hope Academy is this independent high school founded by a Catholic layman. And Hope Academy has 300. They have a waiting list of 400. Overwhelmingly black and Latino kids, low-income kids from the very same neighborhood. Yep. I mean, if they were able to occupy Manly, they would not only take the kids from Manly, but most of the kids on their waiting list would enroll in their school. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is, the whole funding formula is designed to protect teacher union positions, period. That's what it's designed. So the whole sustainable community school model basically says if you lose enrollment, you're not going to lose funding. So so why would you have an incentive?
To keep kids enrolled
to not only keep kids enrolled, why would you have an incentive to improve academic performance? Where if the test scores plummet and parents pull their kids out of the schools, your staffing positions are not going to be affected in any substantial way.
Yeah, and in terms of this budget that unions don't care about how many kids there are in each school, and they just wanted the money, to flow to the teachers naturally. So Mayor Johnson and along with the school board, they wanted to get a loan to subsidize the budget.
Yeah, they wanted to borrow to balance their budget.
Exactly. Yeah, in a very, as I understand, a very high interest rate,
Yeah.
and that caused a lot of confusion, a lot of contradiction among the school board people, and they all resigned.
They all resigned.
Yeah. So how can we balance the budget if there's no incentive, if there's no clear path to go into a more school choice idea now that we don't have accountability? How can we do something like that?
Look, the school district budget could be balanced very easily. And in fact, the school district budget could be balanced easily, and the subsidies that the city provides to school district could be shifted back to the city to balance their own budget. And let me tell you how that could happen.
Yeah.
And it's really simple.
Yeah.
Because it's what we did in 1995 when we took over the Chicago Public Schools. Secretary of Education Bennett called it the worst system in the country during the Reagan years, and of course I was still in college when Reagan got elected. I just want to make that point, so I'm not that ancient. But the point is, he had trashed the schools appropriately, I thought. But what we did was we went in and we literally gutted the central office and central administration. And
so which doesn't really, it's more like the bureaucratic organ that.
Yeah, like in the Chicago Public Schools, about 18% of the staffing positions are not assigned to the schools. So there's
What are they assigned to?
central office, central administration, citywide programs. So
So administrative.
Yeah, administrative and some support services. But the bottom line, it's 8,000. It's 8,000. And the school district, since COVID, added 9,000 additional positions, despite the fact that they lost 9% of their enrollment. And let me point out, while they didn't fill all those positions, because they have been trading out positions, they're still up about 6,000. There is one staff person in Chicago Public Schools for every 7.5 kids. So
Okay.
for one adult working in the schools for every 7.5
And
kids.
how's that ratio for students to teachers? Is that
Well, there's 22,000 non-teachers in the Chicago Public Schools. There's 10,000 more non-teachers in Chicago Public Schools than Chicago has cops.
really?
Yeah.
That's a topic I'm going to get into very soon because.
Yeah. But the bottom line is, if you radically decentralize the administration like we did in '95,
And just cut that.
you could probably save $500 to $600 million. You could go a long way towards balancing the budget.
And that's what you did.
Yeah, and that's what we did. Second thing is, if you go
And that doesn't really affect the quality of your education.
no, it doesn't. Not if you give the schools the autonomy to decide how to use their resources and how to and their staffing models. Okay, so the best districts are the school performing school districts are the school districts that provide autonomy to their teachers or to their principals to basically determine the best models, the best staffing models, to a lot of autonomy in how to spend that money. Right now, only 54% of the money that the district receives finds its way into the local schools. Mm-hmm. And that's outrageous.
Yeah.
We're in New Orleans, not including capital, about 95% of money found its way into the local schools. So it's
difference, yeah.
So the first step is to radically decentralize the district, push the money down to the local school level. The second is to really consolidate those near empty schools. There's about like half.
Just getting all these schools that have
Yeah.
low enrollment numbers
Yeah.
and condensing them into.
What was the number there? I think there's 47 schools that are fewer than a third full, and about 20.
Yeah, I mean, you
20 schools
mentioned
that are
a
fewer
few
than
numbers
20.
of 70 kids per
Yeah.
school building.
So, for
per household.
example, if you
Yeah.
close Manly and you moved the students to another high school and you moved and you did likewise.
How's that logistically
With,
in terms of moving to another high school? Is that a faraway high school? Is there a
No, well,
across the street high school?
if I had been, if I got elected mayor, I would have got, Hope Academy would have accepted the 76 kids at Manly, and most of them were probably on the waiting list for Hope Academy. because they need more space. And they would have enrolled in Hope, and net of what the tuition cost would have been for Hope, you would have saved $5 million. Okay. Yeah. You could have done the same with Douglas and saved $3-4 million. At Douglas School, they're spending $62,000 a kid.
Yeah.
Because of their staffing model. So the point here is just through the consolidations, and that means sitting down with the community and talking about how programs could be consolidated.
Really understanding how each district could be better improved individually, right?
Right. So you take schools in a cluster area and you talk about consolidating it. They did it when they built the New Englewood School. They closed a number of schools and they built a brand new state-of-the-art school. But if you consolidated programs and if you invited charters to perhaps lease buildings that were near empty, charter schools or public schools, and if you if you decided to reconstitute the schools and to bring programs into the schools that would help the district retain students. Like, for example, our enrollment grew by almost 40,000 from 1995 to 2002. Enrollment grew by about 40,000. That was after 15 years that saw a decline in enrollment of 115,000. Now, what happened during that period? People, I mean, did 20 years earlier or 15 years earlier, people started having babies or whatever was it, some sort of thing that, where, I don't know, maybe it was the post-Vietnam War syndrome in terms of baby boom. Maybe it was whatever. The point was, why did enrollment skyrocket? It's because we took failing schools. Like Jones Commercial Academy became Jones Magnet. Now it's one of the elite schools. It has
so magnet schools could also play a big role.
Yeah, so we converted many schools to magnet schools, and we put magnet programs in neighborhood schools. And
so increasing interest of people actually to go. I mean, sounds obvious, but yeah.
We only had one magnet high school when we came in. It was really Whitney Young, maybe two with Lane Tech, and when we left we had 7, and then we had one IB program. When we left we had 20.
Okay.
So schools like Taft and Amundsen that were emptying out and people were avoiding. Schools like Curie, schools like Morgan Park, schools like Jones Commercial, King, Lindblom, all those schools were reconstituted into magnet schools, or they were schools that we put magnet programs like the International Baccalaureate program.
And let me ask you this question now, switching over to another topic, which a lot of your campaign was centered about, which is crime and public safety, right? You were talking, something you mentioned in the campaign, I think something you did in Philly, if I'm not mistaken, is allowing schools to be open extra hours, even into the evenings, and increasing them to be open into weekends as well. We're talking about magnet schools and increasing interest of students to actually go to school. And how do you think this increasement in school time, in school interest, goes along in diminishing crime in the city? Because crime in the city has not been better since ever.
Well, let me respond by saying, crime is going down in the city. The mayor's bragging about it, taking credit for it. And it has the murder rate and the number of shootings have gone down, while overall crime has not necessarily been plummeting. Plus, overall crime, violent crime, is being underreported because they're only responding in real time to about half the 911 calls, and people have just stopped reporting.
What caused the 911 response to drop so badly?
The failure to fill vacancies. They're down according to Snelling.
Vacancies in policemen.
Yeah. And Snelling says they're down about 2,000 officers from full strength. So this is and incidentally, they're not really saving much money because what they're paying close to $275 million in overtime. So at the end of the day, it ends up being a wash. You just get tired cops.
Get tired cops.
Is what they get.
Cover less ground.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the crime wave has declined nationally. There's been in fact, up until January of this year, Chicago was lagging behind the nation in the drop in murders and attempted murders. Only since January has Chicago's decline matched the national decline. I'll tell you, it's primarily due to a primary reason was the election of Eileen Burke, who has stopped releasing people, violent criminals.
Who's Eileen Burke?
The Cook County State's Attorney.
Okay, perfect.
Who ended the policy of the revolving door policy of allowing like 75% of the violent felons who get arrested to be released on pretrial release. Mm-hmm. In fact, from 2020 to 2024, there are almost 400 people who were arrested for murder, attempted murder, who were actually out on pretrial release awaiting trial on another felony that they had been arrested and charged with. So at the end of the day, that was a big. So crime has been declining, but the spike in crime post that occurred that you saw during COVID was in large part, and I believe was overwhelmingly the result of the unions forcing the shutdown of schools in Chicago for 78 consecutive weeks, because there was a 50% increase in school-age youth murdered, and there was a historic increase in violent crime committed by school-age youth. In fact, the number of carjackings by school-age youth 17 years
So
and
a
younger.
proposal like yours to increase the time people stay in school
Exactly.
would massively decrease those
Exactly.
numbers.
Yeah, because during from in the late 90s, in 1993, the murder rate peaked. The what I call there was a huge spike in murder rates back in the late 80s, early 90s. The murder rate peaked at a high of 982. I think it was in 1992,
Okay.
and yet 7-8 years later was in the 400s, and it stayed in the 400s for most years. And the reason for that was not only providing enough police officers so that they could respond to 911 calls in real time and do community policing, where all the police beats had police officers patrolling the communities that the community was familiar with. But it also was because schools were open through the dinner hour, schools were open on Saturdays, schools were open through the summer, schools were open till 8 o'clock at night. In other words, the schools became safe havens for kids. And so if you do those two things, return to community-based policing, well, the officers know the community knows the officers, there's real-time responses to 911 calls, and if you open the school campuses, what do you have? You got 600 campuses, so the kids have
place to stay.
are engaged,
Yeah.
and it's just not. It's not only more tutoring and mentoring, more academic help, but it's also sports and recreation. We gave children
vocational
third meals.
Yeah.
Third
Vocational
meals,
programs,
yeah.
arts, STEM,
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly,
Yeah.
and that makes a difference.
And also something you mentioned in the campaign was violence in the CTA, in the public transit system.
Yeah.
And I saw you posting a tweet about it of a crazy.
I did a cartoon too.
That's right, you did. So how something you mentioned was implementing security and public, policemen in every CTA station and every public transit station. How would that fit into budgets, into personnel? Is that something would be possible? And if you,
Of course.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The mayor's been making a big thing out of smokers on the CTA.
yeah, exactly,
You
yeah.
know, like that. The public enemy number one: smokers,
Okay, yeah.
not vandals. People are assaulting people on the CTA. CTA ridership has not returned to pre-COVID levels. In fact, ridership is only about 2/3 of pre-COVID levels.
2/3, okay.
Now, let me point out that is the primary reason for the CTA's financial crisis. I mean, not only is the city
How come?
and the schools in a financial crisis, but the CTA actually proportionally, as a percentage of their budget, their deficit is the largest.
It's the largest, even when compared to school districts.
Yeah, well, in terms of the percentage of their budget, their deficit
Okay.
next year next year they'll be about 20 to 25% short on revenues,
Okay.
and 2/3 of that reason is because of plummeting ridership.
So if ridership were to go back to pre-COVID levels, that deficit would be pretty much gone.
Well,
So
if it went to
if it's
pre-COVID
such a-
levels, you could probably address about 2/3 of the deficit problem.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So if it's such an easy thing to do, why do you think the current mayors? and
Because
the
they're
city
idiots.
council- Is it just
I hate
like
to
that?
say it. Look, the city's being run by a failed teacher who, in turn, was put in that position by another failed teacher. Stacey Davis Gates lasted 6 years at Englewood. I mean, these are individuals who got into union politics because they couldn't cut it as teachers. Trust me. I mean, we're being run by amateurs. The problem is we've got amateurs who are also dangerous ideologues because they view this.
How come?
Every problem is, for the mayor, every problem, you heard of the boy who cried wolf. Well, we have the mayor who cries. We have the mayor who cries race. So every problem inherited is related to race. Every problem that he has not been able to solve is because of race. Every criticism that he gets is because of race. The other day, he was trying to convince a black audience who were infuriated over the fact that he's clearly prioritized migrants over residents. The city has allocated almost $600 million for migrants. That's not counting
600 million.
600 million for the sanctuary city migrant support services, and that's not counting Warrior Points estimates as much as 200 to 400 million dollars in schools for the migrants. Okay, well, I mean, on the flip side,
so basically they just can't identify the problem and they keep redirecting the problem.
Yeah, they're just subsidizing. They're subsidizing 50, 60,000 migrants who are here. But let me point out that by contrast, the mayor's so-called progressive agenda has produced almost no new affordable housing. He says, first he said they had created 10,000 houses. Now they said that their goal is to create 10,000 houses. But the subsidies right now, like $300 million in subsidies to developers to create like 400 affordable housing units, and then the mental health centers.
There's the head tax that he's planning on implementing, and he tried to increase property tax again to not only suffice the budget but increase community housing again. How does the budget situation fit into all of this? Because
he doesn't know
we're running out of money. We have a 10% sales tax when you account for Illinois and Chicago state tax.
He doesn't know how to balance the budget, so they're going to resort to taxes. Of course, they're going to return to their tax.
How high can that be? Because they're pretty.
They're going to return to their tax-to-rich dogma. What he hopes through the tax-to-rich threats is to get the state to come in and bail them out. Because not only does the city, hold on a second, not only does the city need to be bailed out, but you've got a school district looking at a $730 million deficit. Now the problem is the mayor can't fix the deficit because, first of all, the mayor doesn't really know how to balance the budget, how to do the basic things that you need to do to bring spending under control. Because since COVID in 2019, the city of Chicago spending has grown by, I think, almost 70% since 2019. 70%. The revenues have not grown that much, so now the COVID money is gone. They have big deficits. But also another problem is his unwillingness to take on the Chicago Teachers Union, and his determination to continue to provide them with massive subsidies. Case in point is every year the city declares a tax increment financing district surplus. It's property tax revenues that were collected for economic development purposes through the TIF programs, but were not spent, so it becomes surplus money. And he's been maximizing those surpluses so he can give the teachers union. Last year they gave them, they gave the schools $311 million. Well, why did they give them $311 million just on top of the 56% of property taxes that the school district is already getting? Why didn't they give them the $311 million so that they could pay their own bills instead of the city paying their municipal employee pensions, instead of the city paying their capital debt? I mean, that $311 million should have been spent on things that the city is currently covering, so the city could then save $311 million and balance their own budget. So the first problem is he doesn't even understand the basic fundamentals to balancing a budget. And the second problem is his unwillingness to cut that financial umbilical cord between the city and the schools. He continues to provide the teachers union and his patron Stacey Davis Gates and C2 Union leadership, these massive subsidies that the school district should be funding their own pensions. The school district should be funding their own capital debt. The school district
should be even more compartmentalized.
Exactly.
And again, going back to your idea of more autonomy for each school, more autonomy for each principal, and so on. Yeah.
And what the CTA needs to do is the CTA needs to take that 80, 90 million that they spend a year on private security. You've seen them. I mean, I don't know what the fitness standards are, but I mean, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, the private security, unarmed, untrained, poorly paid, with dogs, okay? With dogs. And they're, most of the time, they clear out when there's a problem. Well, if you took that money, you could hire 400 additional Chicago police officers, assign them to the CTA's current detail. The current detail assigned to the CTA, now brace yourself when I tell you this number, the current detail assigned to the CTA of full-time cops, permanently assigned, not the ones that get paid some overtime to supplement those cops, is I think 132 police officers.
For the whole CTA?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's for what? 350 trains,
Yeah.
1,000, I mean, for everything. Now, that detail is about as large as the mayor's security detail.
Really?
So,
Oh, wow.
so,
Okay.
so, you know, if you create a police transit unit that has the type of resources that New York has. New York has 1,000 cops for their transit system.
Yeah.
If you create that unit and you restore ridership levels to pre-COVID, you will significantly improve the financial health of the CTA
And of the city. And
right,
go
exactly.
back to more people riding the CTA.
Exactly.
And with that it goes.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
just don't know how to do it. It's the most bizarre thing. Particularly the CTA thing is like a no-brainer. I mean,
Yeah, I get it. So we're coming close to an end here, and I want to ask you like a question, a hypothetical question, but could really be a real one.
yeah.
If that 3% difference in votes had gone the other way, if you were to be the mayor, if I were to be speaking with the mayor right now, what would be the changes you would have done to improve, mostly focusing on education and focusing on public safety? What would be the top line things you would have done?
Let me take them let me give you highlights in each. Clearly, I would have reprioritized the budget and done zero-based budgeting to look at all of the city's expenditure efforts. And let me point out that the biggest increases in spending have not been in personal services. There hasn't been an increase,
Or
a
they
real
have been-
increase in headcount. It's been contractual services. So there's been like a massive increase in contractual services. So clearly, there are things that I would have done in terms of zero-based budgeting to evaluate and to assess all that the state is spending. There are just there are things you can do to bring efficiencies to the budget, getting control over overtime, revamping the how they do contractual services. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars to save on that. There are things that you can do through strategic sourcing. Clearly, I mean, these budgets, because they're bloated, are actually easier to balance than people realize. But fundamentally, returning to
so much low hanging for
that's
everybody.
right. Returning to pre-COVID funding levels adjusted for inflation should be a goal. And many of the city council, if they had the technical support to do that, would make recommendations on how they could be done. But the city council lacks access to information, lacks access to the supports that they need analytically. With the schools, look, I mean, bottom line is you return to schools to, even if you return to them to their pre-COVID 2019 staffing levels, they would have one staff person for every 8.5 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the bottom line is you have 22,000 non-teaching employees. You got 8,000 central office employees. Consolidating schools, returning to pre-19, 2019 staffing levels.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Putting programs in schools that will increase enrollment. Like the state will fund alternative schools for kids who have dropped out, overage underachievers. I mean, you can increase their enrollment, and that in turn generates more schools. Providing more autonomy to schools to make their own decisions, allowing charter schools to increase their enrollment if they have capacity. Incidentally, for every child that's in a charter school versus a traditional public school, the district saves $8,600. For every child who goes to a private school through the disbanded state scholarship program, the district saved $12,000.
And why is that?
Well, it's because the district's still getting their money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're still getting their money, even if they lose the kid, they still get the bulk of their money. So at the end of the day, there are things that you can do to balance the school district budget. And on the CTA, that's a no-brainer. The CTA, increase security and also downside the CTA's central bureaucracy, because even though their ridership plummeted during COVID, they increased their headcount. Their non-transit operator headcount by 30%.
So basically what you're saying is in every department of Chicago's mayor's office, there's bloated inefficiencies and
It's like low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, super low-hanging fruit. You need to have a way to Dogify this, as I put it before. You need to.
Oh, bad word.
It's a bad word these days. Yeah. No, in an ideal.
No, really. No, seriously. You need to go in and you need to basically rigorously
get the school people to go actually in the schools and not in the offices. Get the CTA people on the train lines and not in the offices.
Right.
And just follow those paths. It doesn't sound that complicated.
The problem with CTA security, CTA ridership loss is because of violent crime, and because they over 50%. I'm sorry, not over 50%. The overwhelming majority of people surveyed, their biggest concern in CTA is crime. But that also holds true of CTA workers. So a lot of the complaints about the CTA workers are reliability of CTA workers. Well, I'll tell you, if you make the CTA as safe as going to the airports, okay, guess what?
People like working there.
People are going to work there. You're not going to have the absentee level. I mean, trains are going to run out of time.
Makes perfect sense.
That's a big difference. This is not rocket science. It really isn't. There's a pathway to address these financial issues. And look, when I came in and made those changes in Chicago Public Schools, I almost got elected governor based on my popularity as city budget director.
It's been done before.
That's right.
It's not something completely unheard of.
Right, and it was embraced because at the end of the day, if you give the schools, if you push the money down to the local schools, you can not only provide the schools the resources they need, but you can also reduce the district's dependency on the city to bail them out every year. And then if you give the schools the autonomy to make changes that are needed that accommodate the kids, the best decisions being local decisions with accountability, the schools will get better. That's proven. That's proven.
Sense to me, sir.
The biggest obstacle to transforming this city and to improving this city is the Chicago Teachers Union. They are a threat to the economic viability of the city. And they are also a threat to other unions because, and let me give you, so my message to the other union is the Chicago Teachers Union is not your friend. Number one, they are taking a larger and larger share of the tax pie at the expense of the cops, at the expense of their own allies like SEIU. At the end of the day, they're taking a bigger share of the pie. The schools have gone from 40%, 6%, 10 or 15 years ago, I think the Civic Committee said, from 46% in share of property taxes to 56%, not counting the $1 billion in additional subsidies. Yeah. Secondly, the majority of parents of city workers will not send their kids to the Chicago Public Schools. So you got to live in the city. You're paying taxes through the nose. The teachers union is taking a bigger chunk of the pie, so you're not getting nearly the benefits that teacher union workers get. And then the teachers unions are blocking school choice, so you end up having to send your kid or your kids to parochial private schools. Yeah. If you send your kid to parochial private schools, K to 12, if you send 2 kids to parochial private schools,
the Chicago public school system fails.
Right. From K to 12, you will have spent like $140,000.
Yeah.
Now imagine if you put that money in a CD for your kid.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, and then finally, the teachers union has vigorously attacked other unions. They tried to steal employees from from SEIU. They tried to poach their members. They have been relentless in attacking the Chicago Police Department. You know what I mean?
So basically, everything you're saying is very low hanging fruit.
Very low hanging fruit. And it doesn't take rocket science.
And basically, if 3-4% of the vote had gone other way, Chicago would be completely different today.
My wife would have been a lot. My wife would have been a lot more. Would have been, more disappointed. I think she's relieved that we don't have the burden of basically. But no,
I bet she did. Yeah.
In all seriousness, so it was a big disappointment. But what I've tried to do.
Another shot again.
Well, what I've tried to do during the election. Well, what we're trying to do really now is collectively. I think we need to find a candidate who can not only win, get elected, but a candidate who can govern. A big mistake will be supporting a candidate who is running because it's on his or her bucket list.
Yeah.
I mean, we need somebody who will really do what needs to be done.
You're still pretty young, so I think you have a shot.
It's not the age, it's the mileage. But I appreciate you having me on.
Of course, thank you very much for coming. It's been a great time. I think our listeners are enjoying very much. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you for everyone for listening this far, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Thank you.